The air was thick that evening, the kind of Georgia heat that clings to your skin and makes the world feel heavy, even as the sun slips behind the pine trees. I remember the sound of my shoes on the gravel, the soft crunch as I walked up the driveway, thinking only of the sweet tea I'd left chilling in the fridge and the comfort of my favorite chair by the window. But as I reached for the doorknob, my hand met resistance. The door wouldn't budge. At first, I thought it was just stuck, swollen from the humidity, but then I saw the deadbolt glinting in the porch light, locked from the inside. My heart fluttered in my chest, a bird startled from its nest. I knocked, gentle at first, then harder, calling out for my daughter. No answer, just the distant hum of cicadas and the echo of my own voice bouncing off the brick. I want you to be with me in the video, because today is the day I want to clear my heart by telling everything to you. And I wanted to comment your thoughts on my story. And subscribe to my channel, it will help me in this phase. A minute passed, maybe two, before the door finally opened, not to my daughter, but to my son-in-law. He stood there, arms crossed, eyes cold and flat as river stones. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask how my walk had been. He just stared at me, blocking the doorway, making it clear I wasn't welcome. I tried to keep my voice steady, tried to smile like nothing was wrong, but the words tangled in my throat. Is something the matter? I asked, my hands twisting the strap of my purse. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked me up and down like I was a stranger on his porch, not the woman who'd baked birthday cakes for his children and folded his shirts when he was too busy to notice. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and clipped. You can't come in. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. The words hit me harder than I expected. I searched his face for any sign of kindness, any hint that this was just a misunderstanding, but there was nothing. Only a wall. I asked where my daughter was, but he shrugged, said she wasn't home, that it didn't matter. I could feel the panic rising in me, hot and sharp, like the first sting of a wasp. I told him I lived here, that my things were inside, that this was my home. He shook his head, almost pitying, and said, Not anymore. If you don't leave, I'll call the police. For a moment, I just stood there, stunned. The world seemed to tilt sideways, and I wondered if I'd misheard him. Call the police? On me? The woman who'd given her daughter everything she had, who'd opened her heart and her home, who'd spent years making sure everyone else was comfortable, even when she wasn't. I felt my cheeks burn with shame and disbelief, but beneath that, something else began to stir, a quiet, stubborn anger I hadn't felt in years. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized he expected me to shrink, to apologize, to disappear into the night like a ghost. But I wasn't ready to vanish. Not yet. So I did the only thing I could think of. I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and dialed 911. My hands were trembling, but my voice was steady. Yes, I need help, I told the operator. My son-in-law has locked me out of my own home. There was a pause, the kind that stretches time thin, and then the operator's voice, calm and professional, asking for my address, my name, the details I never thought I'd have to say out loud. As I spoke, I saw my son-in-law's expression shift from smug to uncertain. He hadn't expected this. He thought I'd walk away, quiet and defeated, but I stood my ground. I watched him retreat into the house, closing the door behind him, leaving me alone on the porch with the weight of everything unsaid. If you've ever stood on the outside looking in, if you've ever felt the sting of being unwelcome in the very place you helped build, then you know the ache that settled in my bones that night. The fear of losing not just a roof, but a piece of your own story. I waited on that porch, listening to the distant wail of sirens growing closer, wondering how my life had come to this moment, locked out, but not broken. And as the blue lights flickered down the street, I promised myself that whatever happened next, I wouldn't let anyone else decide where I belonged. If you've ever been forced out, if you've ever had to fight for your place in the world, I hope you'll stay with me. This is just the beginning, and I want you to hear it all. There's a certain kind of morning in rural Georgia that stays with you for life. The kind where the mist clings to the red clay and the world feels quiet enough to hear your own heart beating. I was born on a patch of land just outside of Macon, where the magnolia trees grew wild and the porch swings creaked in time with the breeze. My earliest memories are stitched together with the scent of honeysuckle and the sound of my mother's laughter drifting through the open kitchen window. We didn't have much, but what we had was ours: hand-me-down quilts, chipped china, and a sense of belonging that wrapped around us like a second skin. My father worked sunrise to sunset in the fields, his hands rough but gentle, and my mother kept the house warm with stories and sweet potato pie. Sundays were for church, for holding hands and singing hymns so loud you'd think heaven itself might open up and listen. Those days taught me about roots, the kind that run deeper than blood, the kind you can't see but always feel. Family wasn't just a word in our house. It was a promise, a shelter, a reason to keep going when the world turned cold. I learned early that love wasn't always soft or easy, but it was steady. My parents showed me that you hold on to each other, even when storms roll in, even when the harvest is lean. That's the lesson I carried with me when I met James, the man who would become my husband. He was quiet, steady as a river, with a laugh that could fill a room and a patience that could mend any quarrel. We met at a church picnic, both of us too shy to dance at first, but by the end of the night, we were sharing slices of watermelon and secrets under the stars. He asked if he could walk me home, and I said yes, even though my house was just across the field. Sometimes, you say yes to the things you hope will last. James and I started with nothing but hope and a handful of dreams. We saved every penny, scrimped and planned, until we could afford a little plot of land on the edge of town. The house we built together wasn't much by anyone else's standards: a simple frame, a tin roof, floors that creaked with every step. But to us, it was a castle. We painted the walls ourselves, our laughter echoing through empty rooms as we argued over colors and curtain patterns. Every nail we hammered, every flower we planted in the yard, felt like a promise for the future. That house became the backdrop of our lives, the place where we celebrated birthdays, mourned losses, and learned what it meant to forgive. It was where we brought our daughter home, wrapped in a yellow blanket, her tiny fingers curling around mine as if she already knew she belonged. From the moment she was born, I loved her with a fierceness I didn't know I had. We named her Grace because that's what she brought into our lives, a sense of wonder, a reminder that even after the hardest winters, spring always comes. Grace grew up running barefoot through the grass, her laughter ringing out like wind chimes in a summer storm. She was bright and stubborn, with a mind of her own and a heart big enough to hold the whole world. I taught her how to bake biscuits, how to tend a garden, how to stand up for herself when the world tried to tell her she was too small or too soft. James taught her how to fix a leaky faucet, how to drive a stick shift, how to keep her word even when it hurt. We tried to give her everything we had: our time, our stories, our faith that family was the one thing you could always count on. When Grace brought home the man who would become her husband, I wanted to believe our circle was growing, that love would multiply like the wildflowers in our yard. His name was David, and at first he seemed gentle enough, polite, eager to please, always quick with a compliment or a helping hand. I remember the first time he joined us for Sunday supper, how he offered to say grace, his voice steady and sure as he thanked God for family and new beginnings. I watched the way Grace looked at him, her eyes shining with hope, and I told myself this was what we'd always wanted for her: a partner, a friend, someone to stand beside her when the world got rough. In those early years, it felt like we were building something strong, something that would last. Holidays were loud and joyful, the house filled with laughter and the smell of roasting chicken. We took turns telling stories around the table, sharing old memories and making new ones. David would bring flowers for the kitchen, help James fix the fence, and always made a point to thank me for dinner. I let myself believe that nothing could shake the foundation we'd built, that the roots of our family were too deep to be pulled up by any storm. But sometimes, even the strongest trees hide rot beneath the bark. Looking back, I can see the small cracks that started to form. The way David would sometimes talk over Grace, the way he'd bristle when things didn't go his way, the way he'd insist on fixing things that weren't really broken. At the time, I brushed it off as nerves, as the growing pains of blending two families. After all, every marriage has its rough patches, and I was raised to believe that patience and kindness could smooth any trouble. I told myself that love was enough, that if we just held on, the storms would pass. Still, there were moments, fleeting but sharp, when I caught a glimpse of something colder in David's eyes, a flicker of control that made me uneasy. I'd find myself standing at the kitchen sink, hands deep in soapy water, wondering if I was imagining things, if maybe I was just tired or too set in my ways. I never spoke of it to James. He was already growing weaker, his hands trembling more each day, and I didn't want to burden him with worries that might not be real. Instead, I tucked those doubts away, convinced that family meant forgiveness, that love could weather any storm. If you've ever poured your heart into building something, brick by brick, day by day, only to watch the ground shift beneath your feet, you know how hard it is to let go of hope. You keep telling yourself that tomorrow will be better, that the cracks will heal, that the roots will hold. In those years, I clung to the memories of laughter, of shared meals and quiet evenings on the porch, believing that the ties that bound us would never break. But sometimes, the things you love most are the ones that hurt you deepest, and the hardest lessons come from the people you trust the most. It didn't happen all at once. There wasn't a single moment when the air shifted from warm to cold, or when the laughter at the dinner table fell silent for good. Instead, it was a slow unraveling, a quiet erosion that crept in around the edges of daily life. At first, I barely noticed the changes. David would suggest small adjustments, a new place for the keys, a different way to fold the towels, a gentle reminder not to leave my gardening shoes by the door. I told myself it was just a matter of settling in, of learning to share space with someone new. After all, I'd always believed that a home was big enough to hold more than one way of doing things. But then the suggestions became rules, and the rules became expectations. Suddenly, the kitchen was no longer mine to organize. David wanted the pantry rearranged, the spices alphabetized, the coffee mug stacked just so. If I forgot and put something back in its old place, he'd sigh and fix it himself, not saying a word but making sure I saw. Grace would laugh it off, say he was just particular, that it was easier to let him have his way. I tried to laugh too, but each time it felt a little more like swallowing a stone. The house began to feel smaller, the walls closing in with every new restriction. I was asked not to use the living room after 9, because David needed quiet to unwind. The television was too loud, my knitting basket was in the way, my favorite chair was moved to a corner. I started spending more time in my bedroom, telling myself I liked the solitude, that it was nice to have a space of my own. But even there, the boundaries shifted, a knock before entering, a reminder to keep the door closed if I was listening to music or talking on the phone. I wondered when the house had stopped feeling like home and started feeling like a place I was renting by the week. Grace, my bright and stubborn girl, seemed to drift further away with each passing month. She was busy, always running late, always apologizing for missing dinner or forgetting to call. When we did sit together, she was distracted, her eyes flicking to her phone, her answers short and rushed. I tried to reach her, to ask if everything was all right, but she brushed me off, insisting she was just tired, that work was stressful, that I was worrying too much. Sometimes I'd catch her glancing at David, as if searching for his approval before she spoke. It was a look I'd never seen on her face before, and it made my heart ache in ways I couldn't explain. The little slight started to add up, my favorite mug disappearing from the cupboard, a photo of James and me replaced by a generic landscape. The garden I'd tended for years suddenly declared off-limits because it clashed with a new landscaping plan. I tried to hold on to the routines that grounded me, morning tea on the porch, Sunday calls with old friends, tending the roses by the fence, but each habit felt more precarious, as if it could be taken away at any moment. I found myself second-guessing every word, every gesture, afraid of stepping on invisible toes. There were nights when I lay awake, listening to the muffled sounds of their voices downstairs, wondering what I'd done to make myself so unwelcome. I replayed old conversations in my mind, searching for the moment when things had changed, when my presence had shifted from comfort to inconvenience. Sometimes I'd hear my name spoken in a tone I didn't recognize, soft, dismissive, as if I were a piece of furniture that needed moving. I wanted to believe it was all in my head, that I was just being sensitive, but the feeling grew heavier with each passing day. David's control seeped into every corner of the house, subtle but relentless. He started handling the bills, making decisions about repairs and renovations without asking for my input. If I questioned him, he'd smile and assure me it was for the best, that he was just trying to take care of things. Grace echoed his words, her voice tight and rehearsed, as if she were reading from a script. I felt myself shrinking, my world narrowing to a few safe spaces and a handful of routines I clung to like lifelines. If you've ever felt yourself fading in your own home, if you've ever watched the people you love become strangers, then you know the ache I carried. It's the pain of being present but invisible, of loving fiercely and being met with indifference. I kept hoping for a sign that things would turn around, that Grace would see what was happening, that David's grip would loosen. But the questions lingered, unanswered and growing heavier by the day. What had changed? Why was I suddenly a guest in my own life? And how long could I keep pretending that everything was fine, when every day it felt a little less true? There comes a moment, no matter how patient or forgiving you are, when the quiet ache in your chest becomes too heavy to carry alone. For me, it started with little losses, a favorite quilt gone from the linen closet, a box of old letters missing from the attic, the wedding china I'd saved for Grace's special occasions suddenly nowhere to be found. Each time I asked, I was met with shrugs or silence. "We're just decluttering," David would say, his tone so reasonable it almost made me doubt my own memory. Grace would offer a rushed apology, promising to look for whatever was missing, but nothing ever reappeared. The house I'd filled with memories was slowly being emptied, one piece at a time, until it felt like I was living in someone else's story. The exclusions grew sharper, more deliberate. Family dinners that once included me became private affairs, the table set for two, while I was left to eat alone in the kitchen. Holidays that used to fill the house with laughter and music now passed quietly, invitations never extended, explanations thin and rehearsed. Grace's birthday came and went without a word. I found out from a neighbor that they'd gone out of town for the weekend, a celebration I hadn't even known was planned. I tried to tell myself it was an oversight, that they were busy, that I was reading too much into things. But the truth pressed in around me. undeniable and cold. The argument that changed everything began over something small, a broken teacup, a raised voice, a look that lingered too long. I had come home from the market, arms full of groceries, only to find the door locked and my key no longer fitting in the new deadbolt. I knocked, expecting Grace to answer, but it was David who opened the door, his face set and unyielding. "We need to talk," he said, blocking the entrance with his body. I stood on the porch, the groceries growing heavy in my arms, and waited for him to speak. He told me, in measured words, that things weren't working anymore, that I was making the house tense, that Grace needed space, that it would be better for everyone if I found somewhere else to stay. I tried to reason with him, to remind him that this was my home too, that I had nowhere else to go. But he was unmoved. "If you don't leave," he said, his voice low and final, "I'll call the police." The words hung in the air, sharp as glass. I looked past him, searching for Grace, but she was nowhere to be seen. I called her name, but there was no answer, just the sound of the door closing in my face. I stood there for a long moment, the weight of the groceries digging into my hands, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear the world around me. I thought about all the times I'd put others first, all the ways I'd tried to keep the peace, all the pieces of myself I'd given away in the name of family. Something inside me shifted, a quiet resolve, a refusal to be erased. I set the groceries down, pulled out my phone, and dialed the police. My hands shook, but my voice was steady. "My son-in-law has locked me out of my own home," I said, the words tasting strange and bitter on my tongue. The wait for the police felt endless. I sat on the porch steps, the evening air thick with the scent of cut grass and rain. Neighbors glanced out their windows, curiosity flickering in their eyes, but no one came over. I wondered what they thought, seeing me there, alone and shut out of the house I'd built. I wondered if they knew how quickly a life could unravel, how easily the people you love could become strangers. When the patrol car finally pulled up, lights flashing softly in the dusk, I felt a strange mix of relief and shame. I explained the situation as calmly as I could, showing my ID, the mail with my name on it, the photographs of Grace as a little girl standing in the yard. The officers listened, their faces kind but distant, trained to remain neutral. They knocked on the door, spoke quietly with David, then returned to me with the news I already knew in my bones. "It's a civil matter," one of them said. "You'll need to resolve it in court." I nodded, swallowing the disappointment, the anger, the grief. I thanked them for their time, gathered my things, and stood up. I could feel David's eyes on me from the window, a silent victory in his gaze. But I didn't look back. I walked away from the house, my steps slow but certain, each one a small act of defiance. That night, I slept in a motel on the edge of town, the room cold and unfamiliar. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment, every word, every choice that had led me here. I thought about Grace, about the little girl who used to curl up in my lap and beg for one more story before bed. I wondered where she was, what she was thinking, if she missed me at all. The pain was sharp, but beneath it was something steadier, a sense of dignity I hadn't felt in years. I realized that calling the police wasn't about anger or revenge. It was about reclaiming my place in the world, about refusing to be invisible any longer. If you've ever reached a breaking point, if you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your self-respect, you know how hard it is to stand your ground. But sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to disappear. Sometimes dignity is the only thing left to hold on to, and sometimes that's enough to start again. The morning after that long, sleepless night in the motel, I woke with a heaviness that felt like it belonged to someone else. Yet beneath it, a question gnawed at me, sharper than grief. Why had David gone so far? Why had my presence, my very existence, become so intolerable? I'd spent years believing that family was a shelter, but now it seemed I'd been living in a house of mirrors, where nothing was as it seemed. I needed answers, not just for my own peace, but to make sense of the betrayal that had hollowed out my life. I started by calling an old friend, Evelyn, someone who'd known me since childhood and who had weathered her own storms. Her voice was warm, steady, the kind that made you feel less alone even before you'd said a word. I told her everything, how I'd been locked out, how the police had left me with more questions than comfort, how Grace had vanished into silence. Evelyn listened without interruption, then asked the question I'd been avoiding. Have you checked the deed to the house? Are you sure everything's still in your name? The thought sent a chill through me. I'd always trusted that the home James and I built was safe, that the paperwork we'd signed decades ago was enough to keep us rooted. But trust, I realized, could be a dangerous thing. With trembling hands, I called the county office and asked for a copy of the property records. The woman on the line was polite but brisk, and when she read off the names on the deed, my heart nearly stopped. My name was there, but so was David's, added just a few months earlier in a filing I'd never seen, with a signature I didn't recognize. The room spun. I tried to remember every conversation, every document I'd signed, but nothing came to mind. Had I been tricked? Had Grace known? The questions piled up, each one heavier than the last. I needed help, someone who understood the law, someone who could see through the fog of confusion and fear. I made an appointment with Mr. Carter, the attorney who'd helped James and me with our wills years ago. His office was small, lined with books and the faint scent of old paper. He listened carefully as I explained what had happened, his brow furrowing as he flipped through the documents I'd brought. "This is serious," he said quietly. "If your signature was forged, or if you were misled, you have grounds to challenge the transfer. But it won't be easy. People who do this sort of thing, they count on you being too tired or too scared to fight back." As he spoke, a picture began to form, one of careful manipulation, of paperwork slipped into stacks of bills, of trust exploited in the name of family. I thought back to the little ways David had taken control, paying the bills, handling repairs, insisting on helping with paperwork. Each act had seemed harmless on its own, but together they painted a portrait of someone who saw my vulnerability as an opportunity. The realization stung. I'd always believed I was strong, that I could see through any lie, but love had blinded me to the possibility of betrayal from within. Mr. Carter assured me that there were steps I could take, that the law was on my side if I was willing to fight for what was mine. He promised to help me gather evidence, to file the necessary paperwork, to make sure my voice was heard. As I left his office, I felt a strange mixture of fear and relief. The path ahead would be hard, but at least now I understood the truth. David hadn't just wanted me gone. He wanted everything I had built, every brick and memory, every ounce of security I'd saved for my old age. If you've ever felt the sting of being used, if you've ever wondered how someone you welcomed into your home could turn against you, know that you're not alone. Sometimes the deepest wounds are the ones we never see coming, and sometimes the only way to heal is to face the truth head-on, no matter how painful it may be. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork and meetings, each day a test of patience and resolve. With Mr. Carter's guidance, I filed the necessary documents to challenge the deed and prove my signature had been forged. There were affidavits to sign, statements to give, and endless calls to county offices. Each step was daunting, but with every form I completed, I felt a little of my old strength return. It was as if the act of fighting for my home, for my own dignity, was slowly knitting me back together. I no longer felt like a shadow haunting the edges of my own story. I was stepping into the center, reclaiming the ground beneath my feet. Word of the dispute traveled quickly in our small Georgia town. Neighbors who had once only offered polite nods now stopped me at the grocery store, offering words of encouragement and stories of their own struggles. I found unexpected comfort in these exchanges, a sense of community I hadn't realized I'd been missing. People I barely knew invited me for coffee, for Sunday potlucks, for long walks beneath the pecan trees. There was a quiet solidarity in their kindness, a reminder that I was not as alone as I had feared. The shame and isolation that had settled over me in David's house began to lift, replaced by something lighter, hope. As the legal process unfolded, Grace reached out for the first time in months. Her voice was hesitant, thick with regret. She apologized for not seeing what had been happening, for letting David's influence cloud her judgment. I listened, my heart torn between relief and sorrow. I wanted to forgive her, to believe that the girl I'd raised was still somewhere inside the woman who had turned away. But forgiveness, I realized, is not a door you can force open. It's a garden you tend slowly, with patience and care, until trust has a chance to bloom again. I told her I needed time, and she understood. Sometimes love means letting go, at least for a while. David's downfall was quieter than I'd imagined. When the truth came out, when the forged documents were exposed and the court ruled in my favor, he packed his bags and left town without a word. There was no dramatic confrontation, no apology, just the soft slam of a car door and the fading sound of tires on gravel. I watched him go from the window of my new apartment, feeling more relief than triumph. Justice, I learned, doesn't always look like victory. Sometimes it's simply the absence of fear, the knowledge that you are safe again. With the house legally restored to my name, I made the decision not to return. Too much had happened within those walls, too many memories soured by betrayal. Instead, I sold the house and used the money to start fresh in a small apartment on the edge of town. It wasn't grand, but it was mine, filled with sunlight and quiet, with space for my books and my favorite rocking chair. I planted herbs on the balcony, hung photographs of James and Grace on the walls, and let the gentle rhythm of a new routine settle over me. Each morning, I woke to the sound of birdsong and the promise of a day that belonged to me alone. Slowly, I began to rebuild not just my life, but my sense of self. I joined a quilting group at the local church, volunteered at the library, and found joy in simple things: a cup of tea with a neighbor, a good book on a rainy afternoon, the laughter of children playing in the courtyard below. I discovered that starting over didn't mean erasing the past. It meant carrying the lessons forward, letting them shape me into someone wiser, braver, more compassionate than before. If you've ever felt powerless, if you've ever believed that your best days were behind you, I hope you'll hear this. You are never too old, too tired, or too broken to begin again. The world can take many things from you: your home, your security, even the people you love, but it cannot take your spirit unless you let it. I am living proof that it's possible to rise from the ashes, to find beauty in the ruins, to build a life that is yours and yours alone. And as I sit here now, surrounded by the quiet comfort of my new home, I am filled with gratitude, not just for what I've reclaimed, but for the strength I found when I needed it most. There's a kind of silence that isn't empty at all, a silence that holds everything you've ever wanted to say, every boundary you wished you'd drawn sooner, every moment you chose dignity over approval. I used to think that staying quiet was a sign of weakness, that if I just kept the peace, things would eventually get better. But I've learned that silence can be a kind of power, a way of reclaiming yourself when words have lost their meaning. If you've ever stood in a room you paid for, only to feel like a guest in your own life, I want you to know you're not alone. If you've ever swallowed your needs, your pain, your truth, just to keep from rocking the boat, I hope you hear me now. Your story matters, and your voice is worth listening to, even if the only person who hears it at first is you. It's not easy to walk away from the people you love, even when they're the ones holding the door shut. It takes courage to choose self-respect over comfort, to say enough when every part of you aches for things to be different. But sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is step out into the unknown, trusting that the ground will rise to meet you. I've learned that boundaries aren't walls. They're invitations to healthier relationships, to a life where you're valued for who you are, not just for what you give. And I've come to believe that letting go isn't failure. It's faith in your own worth, a quiet promise to yourself that you will not be diminished by someone else's fear or greed. If you're watching this and you feel the sting of betrayal, if you've ever been pushed aside, made to feel invisible, or told that your needs don't matter, I hope you'll take comfort in knowing that healing is possible. The pain might linger, but it doesn't have to define you. You can choose today to begin again. You can choose to surround yourself with people who see your value and honor your story. And if that circle is small, if it's just you for now, that's enough. You are enough. I want you to be with me in this moment, because today is the day I clear my heart by telling everything to you. Your thoughts matter to me more than you might realize. Please share your story in the comments below. Let's build a space where no one has to feel alone in their struggle. If you found comfort or strength in my journey, I hope you'll subscribe to my channel. It helps me more than you know, and it lets me keep sharing these stories for anyone who needs them. Like the video, leave a comment, and know that I'm reading every word with gratitude. Together, we can turn silence into something powerful, a chorus of voices, each one stronger for having been heard. The mornings here are gentle, the kind that slip in quietly through the curtains and settle on your skin like a blessing. I wake to the sound of birdsong and the distant whistle of a train, reminders that life keeps moving forward, no matter how many times the world tries to convince you otherwise. My new home sits at the edge of a small Georgia town, where the streets are lined with dogwoods and the neighbors wave from their porches as you pass. There's a peace here I never thought I'd find again, a sense that I am exactly where I'm meant to be, even if the path to this place was paved with heartbreak. Most mornings, I step out onto my little balcony, a mug of tea warming my hands, and look out over the patch of earth I've claimed as my own. The soil is rich and dark, perfect for planting. I kneel in the dirt, pressing seeds into the ground, basil, mint, a few wildflowers for color, each one a promise to myself that new things can grow, even after the hardest winters. There's something healing about tending a garden, about coaxing life from the earth with nothing but patience and hope. I find myself talking to the seedlings, whispering encouragement the way I once did for Grace when she was small and uncertain. The world feels kinder when you're nurturing something, when your hands are busy making beauty out of brokenness. Inside, the walls are lined with photographs, James smiling in the sunlight, Grace as a child with wild curls and muddy knees, friends gathered around a table heavy with food and laughter. I let the memories fill the space, but I don't let them weigh me down. Instead, I let them remind me of the strength it took to start over, of the courage it takes to choose yourself after years of choosing everyone else. Some evenings, I brew a pot of tea and sit by the window, watching the sky turn from gold to lavender, the town below settling into quiet. I think about all the women who came before me, who weathered storms and planted gardens and found ways to begin again, no matter how many times life tried to close the door. Today, as the sun rises higher, I press one last seed into the earth and cover it gently with soil. It's a small act, but it feels like a declaration. I am still here, still growing, still open to whatever tomorrow might bring. The quiet power of reclaiming your life isn't in grand gestures or loud victories. It's in the gentle persistence of hope, in the willingness to plant something new, even when your hands are still shaking. And as I sip my tea and watch the garden take root, I know that this is what freedom feels like. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of possibility, blooming quietly in the Georgia sun. If you loved my story, make sure to click that subscribe button. It will help me a lot more than you think. Also like the video and comment your thoughts. I would love to hear from you.